I don't know if there is a bait out there, especially a crankbait, that doesn't have a more cult-like following than the Storm WiggleWart. And as you can tell, I got myself a few. Hi everyone, David Bronshinkle here, and today we're discussing my all-time favorite crankbait, the Storm WiggleWart, and how to properly identify them so you're not wasting your money. Because we got PreRapalas that are worth big money to certain collectors and to fishermen that still like to use the PreRapalas alike. From the ones that are being currently made by Rapala right now, to the knockoff lure blanks that are being sold to hobby painters and custom lure painters around the world. But before we get into that, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Also that notification bell. That way you know when my latest video drops. So that way you can find out new information to hopefully catch you more fish. Now, the PreRapalas there's a couple different ways to identify them. The biggest and easiest one probably is the stamp itself on the bill. Most of them will come with a stamp that says WiggleWart or a suspending WiggleWart, depending on the model. But they also can be printed on the belly, like this one right here. And I've also seen some that are printed on the side of the bait as well, which I think are kind of like misprints or whatever. You know, that's in stark contrast to those are the ones that you're looking for. And in contrast to the ones that say Storm on the bell or on the belly, they'll say Storm. Those ones there are the ones that are in current production from Rapala, and they're just not worth, they don't bring the money value as the PreRapalas, and they don't have the same action, which we'll get to later on in the video. Now, to me, the belly stamp or the WiggleWart stamp is everything on the PreRapalas, because if you're a custom lure painter, you might be like me and go on eBay and buy the really beat up looking PreRapalas. I mean, I have a box here full of them that eventually I'm going to repaint. And the biggest thing about them is if you're repainting them, save that stamp as best as possible. Here's one that I recently painted in a green craw, natural green craw. And I did everything I could to save the belly, that stamp. Usually I put a piece of tape over it, spray my paint job down, and then I'll come across it with some real light transparent paint to try and match the bill color or the belly color, wherever the stamp is. And then seal that really good with a good high quality clear coat. That way I kept the integrity of the value of the bait if I ever decide to sell it down the road. The second way we can identify the PreRapalas from all the other ones is in the older days, the molds weren't perfect and they didn't always get glued. The bait halves weren't always glued together correctly. And here's a really good extreme example of that. Is that this here side is obviously glued up higher than its other half. So it creates a really thick, defined ridge that runs all the way down the bait. And somewhat on the belly. Not as defined on the belly, but. And then that's a really extreme example. And here's a more subtle example. It has a ridge there, but it's not as defined. Whereas in contrast to the Rapala ones being made, the seam is virtually gone. You can't even tell that it's two halves put together unless you look at the belly. But that's a good way to identify them. And then in certain years, they actually had what they called the bubble bill WiggleWart, where they actually had an indentation on the bill itself to where the split ring would ride when it's in storage. And I think the whole deal was, the whole concept behind it was that it was supposed to create a bubble trail as the bait was moving through the water. How that really worked in practice, in reality, I don't know. I've never thrown a bubble bill one. They only did it for 2 or 3 years there, and before they went back to the normal bill. And then finally is the rattle itself. These baits, the PreRapalas, were made of a different type of plastic, and I believe the material for the rattle itself was actually different. So what you get is a real deep thud sound versus the ones that are being made by Rapala today. Now, if you were to throw these baits out in the water side by side, you'll find that they also got a slightly different action as well as a different rise rate. Going back to the plastic material, the ones that are made now with the lighter plastic will float. They'll, if you were to dive them down, stop your retrieve, the one that is made nowadays rises up quicker than the old PreRapalas. And then you'll also notice, if you were to go down in a swimming pool or something like that, that the PreRapalas, as they're going through the water, they'll have what we call a hunting action. And by that, I mean they'll be going down, they'll be swimming down, and then occasionally they'll kick off to the right for a little bit, come back to center, go back, maybe go to the left a little bit, come back to center. And they'll kind of just do that throughout the retrieve erratically. Versus the newer ones are kind of more of a, they'll just keep swimming. They won't vary from side to side very often. Now, earlier I mentioned knockoff WiggleWarts. There's a couple of companies that have had molds made to be very similar to the WiggleWart. And they all work. They all are a little bit different depending on who you go through. But the one that I found that is closest to the actual PreRapalas that catch me a ton of fish and what I paint on a lot are the ones that are sold through Predator Bass Baits. They have the sound to them. They got the hunting action like the PreRapalas, and they got that slower rise rate. I'm not sure if it's because of the plastic or what the deal is, but if you're looking for a good WiggleWart to knockoff blank to paint up, give them a look at. Now, I don't think there's a single touring pro out there that does not have at least a handful of these PreRapala WiggleWarts. You're just a fish catcher out here in the Midwest. So if you have the funds, I highly recommend you guys go out on eBay or on some of these Facebook groups that specialize in these PreRapala WiggleWarts and pick up a handful. But I also understand that, not all of us are willing to spend $20 to $100 on a single WiggleWart. And in those situations, the ones that are made now by Rapala, they catch fish. Here's a new one compared to one that I've had for a year or two now. There's nothing wrong with them. Same thing goes for the knockoff versions. If you're into painting them yourselves, they get bit just as well. It's the little subtleties of each and little variances, just like with everything else in fishing, where one gets bit better than the other. It's like throwing a 1/2 ounce jig versus a 3/8 ounce jig. Some days they want that 3/8 ounce better than the half, and some days it doesn't matter which one. So if you guys got the opportunity to pick up a few, it doesn't hurt. I hope you guys enjoyed this content. I hope you guys learned something from it. I hope it also saves you guys from making a few mistakes. If you're going on the secondary market and buying one that is custom painted from a guy, make sure that they have the stamp on it, or they're obviously got that seam where they're not glued together, or the very obvious one, the bubble bill one. That way you guys aren't accidentally buying quote unquote custom painted ones that are really knockoffs that are being passed off as PreRapalas. So until next time, everyone, we'll catch you guys out on the water.